Wow, Dave, what a score! I mean, that part of the ending, some of the reharmonization almost reminded me of like the Canterbury scene. If you know about that particular slice of progressive rock history in England, yeah, just really an amazing score. So many different things, so much inventiveness and vitality and excitement and I mean, I don't want to be patronizing or anything at all by saying this, that you have come so far in your orchestration abilities. I mean, I usually feel that it's not my place to say that, except for that in this case, that really is, like you and I have kind of walked on this road together now for quite a while, for several years of you sending in different interpretations and scores, and I feel like this is the most serious effort that you've ever made in one of these challenges, and it just the work and the craft, and a lot of I can see some lessons that I've taught being applied here, and I just think it's really, really thrilling. And anything I can do to help you out with this, I will give it my best. So, with that, let us start by just going straight to the evaluation criteria. So there's no harp scoring for me to comment on, as you've seen in quite a few other entries where I sit around and talk about the harp, hopefully not too boringly for several minutes. So let's just go straight to this, and it's almost not even worth mentioning about the pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano concern. That's not, you have huge full-on scoring on this first screen, pretty much all the way through until we get to B. As to thematic material, you really do treat it in different ways, but I'm going to talk about some ways that you could improve the scoring, right? And some ways you could sort of maximize certain instruments. But it's similar in some ways, each of these 4-bar groups, but you sort of quite thicken things up a bit here and there. The thing about it is that you've got this horn scoring here, and trombones and so on, and they really are sitting right in the center of that picture and kind of barking along to the rest of the music, right? And then here you're basically just intensifying that. And the thing about that is that this is going to make the two sections sound the same, even though you have varied what you're doing in your middle winds and in your strings, right? And here you just kind of leave out the strings. So it's just a, if you want this kind of a sound which is really, really center heavy, right? It's not even just that you have focused so much weight here on the brass, and done it in a very kind of central area of the pitch range, but also that you don't really reach all that high with your winds or your strings. There isn't that kind of scorching high B that we see in the woodwinds. Now here in the piccolo, you have scored in a very weak register for the instrument. Now, if these pitches were scored, say, with A2 flutes, then they would just leap off the page. If those pitches scored in flutes and say A2 oboes were doubled by the violins in say the first violins in octaves, then you'd get a much brighter color right in here. But I mean, such as it is, with the way that this has been scored, I mean it's fine. It's just really, really intense, the way that you've doubled up your horns and trombones together. Just really and then the trombones essentially, the bassoons essentially playing the same pitches right in there, and then this wonderful kind of leaping up motion that you've got right in here. So this kind of leaping motion is sort of anticipating what's about to happen in the accompaniment figures, right? It's sort of anticipating that to a degree. So, but it's not all that audible. Did you notice? It was kind of hard to hear, and that's just because of the overtones from the horns and the trombones put together. They're really kind of blotting out this nice figuration right in here with your middle strings and middle winds. So, moving on and looking kind of at this mirror, you have kind of given up on that idea right in there and just kind of intensified that bam 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 bam. And I mean, I see what you're doing here. You're kind of letting the first clarinet take over for what the first oboe part is. But once again, piccolo is playing everything that the top notes of the piano score were playing, but just very weakly, right? So it's that is a way to just to completely ensure that top that the top pitch that you transcribed over into your score will not be very clear and loud, and you can hear that in the score. And then here we're piling on to that that middle range here with even more horns, and there's like no support of that higher thing. So like you are intentionally making it very mid-rangey, very very intense. And if I were to sort of flip the first evaluation criterion on its head and say like pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, no pitches below middle C, are you sure that you want to orchestrate it that way? I would say, like, I'd flip it on its head and I'd say, this is very, very intense all the way through. It's using the same pitches in the same registers of the same instruments for much of the action, right? Is that what you want to do, right? Because it ends up being essentially the same quandary that that first criterion was, right? The pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, no pitches below middle C to the end of the passage, right? So in this case, we have very, very strong weight in middle register, and with surrounding pitches are providing some weight from below, but we just really have this intense grind right in the middle. So the question is, like, do we want this to be the overall sound for 16 bars all the way through? Or it's actually more than 16 bars. 24 bars. So, and only you can answer that question. I'm not going to judge your aesthetics or anything like that, but just to mention that it really is focused, it really centered right in there. You're not using your trumpets or anything to play above the middle register and so on. So there really isn't a whole lot of weight. Like, you're not doubling the clarinets with the trumpets or anything, or providing the E above that, or So it's really is like the upper part is kind of suppressed. All right. So speaking of which, let's talk about the next concern, which is melodic development soars quite high, accompaniment figures cover a wide range. All right, so as far as the accompaniment figures are concerned, you've supplied these in here, and in the mock-up they sound pretty good. But in the sort of the mirroring section over here, they're absent, right? And I feel that affects the impulse of the music. But I really do love this. Yup, up, da 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 ba bum. That you've got this this kind of counterpoint working in here, and I think that's really powerful. But I think you could still have the original accompaniment figure from the piano score, and it would sound great. And we just drop it down as you did here in the cellos. Now, as far as this is concerned, about my only concern here is that it just really isn't all that strong. I mean, it's sounding all right in the mock-up, but that's in practice. You have so many instruments playing the melody here, and you have one instrument or one group of instruments playing the accompaniment figure. So it just feels a bit weak right in there, right? So, what could be done to possibly ameliorate that problem, right? And just kind of looking at who is available, right? Thinking about this part right in here, this bass clarinet part, could that have been played by the English horn? And then could the bass clarinet have been used to thicken up this right in here with some nice staccato playing, some just real juicy, punchy staccato supporting this? Now, there's one last issue kind of overall, and that is kind of a strange mixture of dynamic approaches, right? So you've got mezzo forte in your strings, forte in your violin here, and then of course forte with accents in the horns and trombones, and then forte in the wind. So why are the strings weaker than the brass here? Right? You have a mezzo forte on your upper trombone. I don't understand why that should be. Shouldn't they all be the same? Like, are you're sort of wanting to hold back the upper one? I don't understand. Like, they should all be. I mean, like, if you want to balance this, especially with this really strong kind of scoring, then I think the percussion and brass should be forte, and the strings and wind should be fortissimo, right? Or just some kind of balance like that. Maybe the strings and winds could be forte, and the all the brass and percussion could be mezzo forte. And then I think you would hear the strings coming out a little bit, but still it'll just the in terms of the upper, realizing the kind of upper right hand part of the score will still be very underpowered, right? Okay, so right in here we've got this nice little octave, and it's this is all working fine. It's interesting that you have like the brass really going to town on the accompaniment figure, and that's kind of cool. Like the trombones trading off to the trumpets atu, and see, I think you could express all of this, like if both voices are the same dynamic, you could express the entire thing just with single with one voice but intervals and so on, and just marking atu when you go to those voices sharing a part, right? Just I think through all, if they're all going to be playing the same rhythm throughout, it's just more convenient, right? I mean, this is so much more readable than this here. Okay, and then like here you do go to that. So I don't know, maybe this is something with Dorico, like combining the parts, or I don't know. I don't know that much about Dorico. Okay. But yeah, I mean, you're making the melody here just massively strong, right? So it's the same pitches all the way through for those who are still getting used to sight reading transposing brass. So they're all of these instruments are playing the same pitch, right? And that is playing an octave below the violins and oboes, and it's also playing unison with the first bassoon, and then eventually the first bassoon drops down the octave and so on, and joins with the yeah. So I mean, it just this part in here, the clarinets and violins and so on, it's not very strong compared to the to just the weight of the melody, especially with the brass kind of crossing this territory as the other instruments are playing. But I mean, it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. But you might want to work on balancing things, and maybe the brass could lighten up on maybe do you need horns to be accompanying these instruments, right? Is the question. Then here, kind of the same approach again. Okay, which is perfectly fine. I really, once again, I really like that yet-da-da in the horns. So cool. And yeah, it just really kind of scorches its way all the way up to here, and I like the contrary motion right in here from the horns. One little issue is I feel like you're cutting the nose off of this line, right? Where does it want to end up? On E. E. But you're going E. Right? So I feel like we kind of don't arrive. Like with the bassoon, we're rushing up to this E and we do play that, right? But here with the trumpets, we're rushing up to the E, and that like the strongest instrument or instruments in this entire equation here are running up to this E, but who actually gets the E is like one of the weakest instruments, the violas. And then here, like, here's the other problem, Dave, and that is that this phrase ends here on the downbeat with everybody rushing up to the higher E. And then in the piano score, Falla drops down an octave and starts a new phrase on the second beat of the bar. So 2, 3, 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1. You see the emphasis there, right? So if you were just to complete the E's in all the instruments, including these clarinets, they can easily play, they're written F sharp. Then just continue on with the scoring the way that you've got it in here. I think it would sound great. One little kind of thing right in here is like, I feel that the momentum here is kind of like there's sort of a sense of inertia in here because of the lack of that accompaniment figure that's in the left hand of the piano right in here. That ba 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 kind of thing is taken out, and there's just really really heavy emphasis on the melody. So, and then instead we just have this ba, 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 ba. It's just sort of like elephant foot, right? Kind of thing. So we're just, it sort of loses the sprightliness, right? So maybe less of a bass line, more of a figure, right? In there, figuration. Yeah, and then it's like you're bringing in your low brass again. So like adding these together, like all in a row, we just end up with this, very kind of weighty sort of lower sound. Now, I realize this may seem like it's going against what I'm saying overall about having lower tones in in the arrangement, but it's just how you use them, right? Whether, what kind of feeling do they have as they work with the music. And then, there's I think that the kind of like the rhythmic counterpoint right in here is very, very cool, though. See, but I'm just wondering maybe if it weren't quite so low, but it's just a thought. A lot of this, I'd say, like for concert trombone players, a lot of what's here probably would be funner for them to read in tenor clef, but it's certainly no big deal for them to read it in bass. I would say like the second trombone, you could leave in bass clef, and the first trombone, when you're extracting the parts, to put it in tenor clef, I would say. All right, I kind of like this kind of phrasing idea. Ba 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 ba. So here I would say like jumping up, right? There's a certain line that is sort of leading to this ya da 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 da, and then like I think when you leap up with it, instead of continuing on a downward kind of a downward angle there, it sort of takes away the general direction of the music, but it's still really kind of cool the way that you interpret this. I think some of this just has to do with the fact that you jump up with the horns right here, right? And so that kind of forces everybody else up to follow. So, about the only thing that I would say about this is like, do you want this to be so paced, right? So it's almost like a runaway kid at a in a supermarket or something like that, or just kid running down the street, and their mom is sort of chasing after them, and they're just kind of they're just going for it, and they're just seeing how fast they can escape, and but when you pace it, it's like that we lose that sort of runaway quality. So if you're like taking away all of the accompaniments and the slurring and everything else, the original where is this going, right? And that's the way that it's interpreted in the piano. But right. So we're by adding the staccatos, right? We're sort of really pacing every single pair, and the same thing with the slurring pattern. Da 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 da. Right. So are we losing the context of the original kind of wild motion right in there? I would just say, like, I don't know. A lot of times I ask these questions, and they're not necessarily saying like, well, of course they do. That's not the point. It's just, is that a question that asking yourself will result in maybe rethinking something, or maybe in confirming your decision, being like you say, well, I don't see it that way, Thomas. I think that this other way works better for me, and that's perfectly valid, right? So, because if I felt that it didn't work at all, I would say so, right? I wouldn't ask the question. Okay, so that takes us to B. And I feel that the preceding phrase leads into this next section really nicely. So, no question about maintaining driving staccato, transitioning smoothly into the next passage. Well, the driving staccato, of course, which we just discussed, has been transformed. I guess it's sort of there in the strings, but the transition smoothly to the next passage, that is certainly there. I feel that works great. So the concerns that we're going to have starting at B, I wish that the page had broken at B. It'd be easier to explain, but the concern from B is contrast of color, breadth of texture, right? So the and there's also once again, the piano score is sort of limited in the middle of the range, right? So a lot of these things you are really addressing. Differentiated roles and closely spaced melodies, overlapping accompaniment figures, highlighting inner voices. You are tackling that. Okay, so and there's also the question of keeping high interjecting notes from sounding too glaringly repetitive. Okay, so we're going to be thinking about all these things as we proceed. But just looking at the very cool treatment right in here, this is going to be a very massively thick sound here on the trumpets, like this, bap, 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 it's just really, and with the motion of the trombones below, it's very, very fun. So the violas here are really at a disadvantage with the way that you've scored this. For real. For a real beefy kind of sound there from your strings, you could have easily played like open fifths here on your second violins, and then you get an extra A out of it with which to double these mighty trumpets right in here. And then this little thing goes bleep, and you've sort of made it part of the bum bum da 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 da. That you sort of put it underneath this accent in the strings. Then you've got this little blip here from the oboe. So, yeah, I mean, it's... Yeah, I mean, the little touch on the xylophone. It kind of works within the context of the phrase right in here. So I'm not going to diss it at all. Turning the page, we see kind of those similar blips, but here you're kind of making it more part of the the overall jump up here with the strings. So I think it really does keep it fresh, and that little touch on the xylophone helps it all make sense. Now, right in here, you've just so reinterpreted the music from the piano score that I almost can't like maintaining differentiated roles. The thing about it is that the functions of the lines are so different. The counter melody instrument, what was the melody instrument 2 bars ago is now the counter melody instrument, right? And then you have the strings taking up the melody, and so on. So it really is so intertwined, and I think it works really, really well. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's just, yeah. I'm a little unsure about the solidity of, but I really do like the syncopation right in here. Just putting that weight right there on the second beat, and then coming in here with your A2 clarinets and bass clarinet. So, all right. So let's talk about that. In the mock-up, it really sounds like a bandoneon, right? And the actual truth about it is that is sort of what it's going to sound like from live players, for 2 reasons. One is you've got clarinet and bass clarinet in octaves, right? So that, automatically you get that kind of complex stacking of overtones that really come out. They're very bright above the fundamental tones of the instruments. And then on top of that, you have first and second clarinet playing A2, which gives you that phased sound as well. So now you've got the phasing of your two non-vibrato instruments, and you've got the bass clarinet an octave lower, right? But, I mean, as much as you reinterpret the music right in here, effectively I feel, although I'm still a little dubious about the weight and length of these lower notes here in the low brass. As much as you reinterpret this, you also reinterpret this entire passage, right? So like the concerns that I've got, keeping triplets from overwhelming the melodic line above, and then the widely reaching left-hand pattern. So you just completely ditched the left-hand patterns, right? So the result of that is that it really gives this more of a kind of a minuet type of a rhythm. We've sort of have lost the kind of leaping, the sense of kind of leaping rhythm, and that just like a lot of the energy has been curtailed in this. So I mean, if you are happy with that, or if you're now telling yourself, "Oh my God, I forgot to add that. Oh crap, what did I do?" Then you could easily do that. You maybe lighten up some of the sustained notes and so on. You could definitely put that back in. I don't think it would hurt the music at all. However, just looking at the way that this is scored, I like this little running line right here in the first violins. And then, we've got these kind of extended lines right in here, and so on. Okay, so, all right, so here's the thing, is that, like the melody was actually, may have looked to you like a harmonic element, right? But it was those accented notes in the right hand. B, E, G, F, E, right? That was the melody, right? So it's kind of sort of, those E's have kind of just turned into a bit of, kind of just turned into harmonic elements, I guess. So, and you're kind of turning the triplets into the melody, ba-da-da, ba-da-da, ba-da, ba-da-da-da, right? But the problem is like this, it's less of a melody because there isn't that dun, dun, dun kind of a feeling, right? Coming down from the... So, yeah, so it's just a little strange, right? But like then you add the oboe right in here, and that like you immediately get that slight tone color. I'm not sure how many oboes we've got here. Is this two Oh, I guess one. Okay, so that's right on the bar line, so that's hard to read. Okay, it's still, in terms of strength against two clarinets, it's not going to be very strong, but adding two oboes, that will be incredibly intensely reedy. What if you went down to one clarinet here and one oboe? I think that would be just a better balance, right? And then you're stacking the flute on top of that, and then the piccolo. So I mean, I think you tossed a bunch of really important stuff from the piano score, but like the result of that though is just something completely individual, right? But I still miss the dotted rhythm, bum 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 bum. It just kind of, I feel that is something you shouldn't throw away. But yeah, but kind of cool, the castanets and tambourine and so on. It's very almost unsettling music right in here. Okay, and then we get to C. Ba, 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 ba. All right, just one thing that I would kind of mention right in here. That sort of starts with my concern of a convincing allargando expansion, smooth release into bar 49. Okay, so the allargando is convincing. The release is convincing. But there's one thing that maybe you didn't take into account, or maybe you did take it into account and you just said, "Oh, I don't care about that. It doesn't matter." And that is the pedal effect of the piano, right? So as the pianist hits the low note and then adds notes on top of that, each of the notes sustain into the next bar, right? Or up to the next bar. So, like, with the way that this is scored, you are basically covering the notes of the left hand and then the right hand and so on. But there isn't any sense of sustain from each note carrying forward, right? So maybe that's something that could be added or adjusted or something. If you wanted to, I mean, the way that you've realized it in the bassoon, lower strings, and and then flute and violins and so on. This could even in itself be bulked up a little teeny bit. Maybe the instruments that are going to carry on, like maybe adding some clarinets and second violin a little bit, right? But I mean, the way that it is okay is okay. You don't need to really change anything. But if there was some way of kind of carrying through some of these pitches in a sustained way, that would be cool. Yeah, after all, like you could have one instrument, say like the violas, carrying through, like just kind of covering all of the pitches as they go up, and then you could have the other instruments, like say playing this D and then tying it, and then Divisi playing the G sharp and then tying it, right? And then you could have the second violin playing the B flat and then tying it as the viola goes over it. Do you see what I'm saying? So it's just like so that it really feels almost like the orchestra is pedaling, right? Okay. So continuing on, you turn the rising line into kind of a pickup into the melody, and that's very, very cool. And here it's the case of the disappearing flute all over again, as some people may have remembered from my 100 More Orchestration Tips book. By the way, this tip is available. You don't have to buy the book. You can just go on to orchestrationonline.com and just look up, just look under the category of flute in the orchestration tips, and this will come up. So yeah, in this case, like you can sort of hear the flute on top, and it's a case where the flute, the resonance from the flute below is absorbing the identity of the flute above, and that is an intentional effect, by the way. Now, if it's intentional in your case, Dave, then that's great too, and like you can see that there are ways that this effect can be borderline, where you really do know that there is a flute up there. You can kind of hear it, but if the string part were to get more intense, then the flute might disappear entirely as its own independent element if the phrasing was all exactly the same. It's kind of interesting how you manage the pattern right in here. This button 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 button. If I were to just critique it a little bit, I would just say that like the moving line, like the eighth notes are really, really emphasized in this. The pacing of those eighth notes are really, really emphasized, and the little offbeats are, you just got viola and first bassoon, and I wonder if that is enough, right? If that's enough to, if the syncopated voice is strong enough in this equation. It feels to me like it may be just a little weak. It's a great idea. The other thing is, like, did you experiment a little bit with like not having staccato on the syncopated part? Because it's a little inconsistent. You're adding staccato to a tied note, and what does that mean in the end, right? So maybe it's better to just to see if you could have like the syncopation could be slurred or tied, excuse me. It could be more smooth, and the staccato part can be what it is, and there could be maybe just a little bit more emphasis on those alternating notes. Because there is so much weight, like when you're adding this harmony behind it with the clarinet family, just really does add a lot of emphasis on the eighths. So you can see, like, even when the flute really climbs quite a bit, the violins from below do sort of absorb it. And now here's the interesting thing. Did you guys notice in the mock-up when the second violins were added and the first violins together with the seconds dropped an octave, and then you continued on, like you just still had the flute up here playing this, they just continued to absorb it even though it was 2 octaves higher. It's partly because of the added strength and the intensity of the lower tones, right? The playing on the G string. All right, I will say one thing in here. I am not disappointed by the that just that wonderful little kind of leaping rhythm in here, and that's one reason where I sort of feel that, like, if you're going to have the leaping rhythm in here kind of played so nicely, why is it removed from other parts? Like, you remember I was talking about how you kind of recomposed a lot of B, like the second half of B, and then here, which I'll talk about in a little bit, it's also missing that wonderful leaping rhythm. But this is really cool. Like, you just suddenly up the tempo, like you have the Celerando here, and suddenly there's just more vigor, right? And on top of this, like the whole criteria, like keep the accompaniment pattern from becoming too regular, therefore predictable. I mean, this stuff is really edge of your seat type of scoring, right? So, and you're keeping the excitement going and the intensity going. So I don't think that that's as much of an issue, but if there was any way to vary something about the color, the texture, the placement of the pitches, anything, then I think it would really help this from feeling like kind of a rhythmic pad. And careful treatment of the melodic voice to make it feel authentic to the composer's style. I've got to tell you that an intense violin line with a solo flute an octave above that's getting absorbed into the violin color, that is a mainstay of Spanish scoring, and other things like mariachi bands also have that. Like you'll hear the violins playing harmony, and then you might have something an octave higher, whether it's like a flute or another instrument that gets absorbed into it, right? So that kind of scoring exists, right? That is true to the composer's style, I would say. There's nothing wrong with it at all. And even though I'm not going to be evaluating the E section in this video, I really feel that a lot of what you do right at the end is very much harkens to the Nights in the Gardens of Spain. It's a beautifully composed homage to that. Okay, so starting in this new section, we are headed towards a section where I had a concern in the tempo changes that I wrote, managing the sense of restraint, leading to a burst of energy, and so on. And you've sort of chosen to go a slightly different route with it, and part of that just is involved with like kind of the scorchingness of the first trumpet part, and like adding the harmonization here in the clarinets, and that works so well, right? It's just its own thing, and of course the octaves in the violins, and once again that also harkens back to a very Spanish style arranging, and some popular works, some orchestral works that really is reminiscent of that. And right in here, you're doing everything that I'm asking for in the first section. The whole thing about keeping the accompaniment pattern from becoming too regular and too predictable, and I love the sense of syncopation in here, and it's just so nice, right? Which is why I just feel there's a big hole right in here. But I'll talk about that when we get there. Da 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 da, buddy. And what's supposed to happen here? Bum 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 bum. Dun dun dun. Right? So maybe you decided to leave that out or just interpret it harmonically, or maybe you forgot to put it in. You're thinking, oh no, what did I do? All right. And then, all right. So I feel like the sort of the wonderful syncopation of before and the setup for this solo. I think they just don't have enough juice by themselves without those left hand patterns that are in the piano score that got left out. So that's what I would, that would be one thing that, if I were working on this, getting this piece ready or something for a concert or something, but that might lead to a big discussion and so on. Okay. And then once again we don't have the we don't have that real aggressive left hand right in here that just is really keeping the and is actually leading to this intensity, right? So it's so I would just say think about it, consider before you commit to leaving that out, because you have so many lower instruments available that have the nimbleness, have the spryness to play those patterns and really set things up. Even if just a single instrument like a bass clarinet, right, could really fill in that, and as opposed to having more static background pads in the horns, because you sort of do this a lot, right? You've got your background pads in the horns here, and you've got them here, right? It's just kind of the same thing again, right? So you just have the opportunity to do something else right in there. But other than that, I really do like the way that this winds down. The but it just there is one little thing missing, that sort of bite at the end, right? There are those patterns that sort of climb down. There are 3 in a row or 4 in a row, and then right at the end of each one there's this just big bite on a low F sharp, right? So I feel the absence of that. Actually, the last one's an A flat, I think. But yeah. And now from D, things get really wild. And I'm not sure about a xylophone that goes all the way down to D. Like you've got here. That seems a little far. Some xylophones go down to F, but yeah, and some just only go down to middle C. So this is the kind of thing that might end up getting transposed up an octave. Maybe there's some way of changing the context here or something. But I mean, I just really love how wild the scoring gets from here. It's really intense, and I love the way that this climbs right in here. I'm just not so sure about why you drop down, right? Like you've got all of this motion here to support. So why does the xylophone kind of fall down, right? I think that it should just follow the curve, this sort of this building, this kind of building part in here where you're adding more and more. One thing I think that you could possibly be doing more in when you're doing these massive gestures and stuff. Don't be afraid to double string lines with wind lines. You know what I mean? Like you could have had a really massive tutti going towards the end here by adding winds, which the winds could just be playing staccato, or they could even just not. They could even just be playing regular old eighth notes, slurred too, right? So, yeah, I mean, I think that just kind of covering the same general pitches as this increases. But yeah, I mean, you've got your contrabassoon sort of plowing along down here at the bottom, and double basses. This is kind of strange. Like you bring your tuba down to piano, and you bring your double basses down to piano, right? So shouldn't the double basses stay the same dynamic as the rest of the strings, and the brass be the ones that go from mezzo forte down to piano? But the yeah, the scoring here is all fine. This is just really, it's just so much fun. Yeah. It's just so wild. This is like one of those ones that I really, really want to hear what an orchestra, like how would an orchestra interpret this? Okay, all right. But I mean, there's, in terms of like the scoring in here, it all pretty much works, right? Like for what it is. Like I said before, you could bulk up the or double what's going on in the strings as they get higher and higher with the winds. I think that would work really, really well. All right, now right in here, these tone colors are like pure Mussorgsky, and by Mussorgsky, I don't mean the Mussorgsky that was cleaned up by Rimsky-Korsakov. I mean the Mussorgsky of Night on the Mountain on St. John's Eve, right? The original Night on the Bald Mountain that poor Mussorgsky kept trying to work into an opera. Like he composed this idea, there's this big black mass and everybody goes nuts, and so I'm going to put it in this opera. Well, it just kind of didn't work for that. All right, well, I'll put it in this other opera that I'm going to write, and then he never wrote that opera, and the poor guy. it would have been Titanic if he could have just gotten it on stage. I think that would have made his reputation in Russia. I think he would have been able. I mean, I think he could see right away that would have been the key to immortality if he could just get it on stage as part of an opera, and he didn't. The poor guy. But yeah, but these this whole thing in here, the melody and the clarinets, and then going to a harmonized melody over the oboe family instruments. That's so powerful, and then like the horns in the background. That's just so fun. Really, really cool scoring, and the fact that like you're going into this with like no pretensions of being majestic or huge, right? You're just interpreting the music right as it is. You're not even building any crescendo into it, which you easily could have done. And then you have this ritardando in here. And then I'm wondering, was this accidentally a duplicate right in here? Sort of this repeat right in here doesn't really seem to do anything. And this sort of brings up another thing, and that is if you're going to end up here, ba 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 da 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 da, couldn't the strings have come in here and like doubled the violins and sort of built up and gotten bigger? And if you're going to repeat this, like gotten bigger and came in here, and then suddenly you're dealing with a tutti, right? And it's very powerful. If you're going to have this much strength here, trombones and horns, and then eventually doubling the horns on that, and then adding the trumpets and everything else, shouldn't you double your, like, once again, can these parts possibly be doubled by winds above, on the same notes? Do the violins have to drop down an octave and then jump up an octave? Could they just be, could it just be this D up here? D, 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 ba, 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 D, C, 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 instead of C, C, C. C says da, 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 just D, 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 ba, 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 ba. Do you know what I mean? Would it be possible to, like, have everything kind of stably up in a higher place? And maybe doubled by flutes and oboes and clarinets and everything else. This could be leading to a part that harmonizes and is all together with a really solid with the strings, and then you have a mighty tutti right in here, right? That's all this stuff built in. I would say if these parts are forte and the trombones are forte, then the trumpets can be forte too, right? They can all be forte together, but leading to this, I think the agitato you put in a bar early. Right, da 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 bum 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 bum. Right, it's the effort. It's pushing it over the hill. Right, the thing that Sisyphus never gets to the top of the hill, but by this mighty effort, the music is getting to the top of the hill. Right, but like da 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 da. Right, it seems to kind of lose that moment of that beautiful moment of emphasis, right? going on in here, the thing that I would say about this is that, you know, if you are heading into this section and you're going to have the patterns interpreted mainly by the xylophone, that's all cool. But I'm just wondering whether or not this part, like seeing as how you have such solid brass. Remember, I was saying like in the first section, if there was any problem with it, possibly it would be the reverse of the evaluation criterion, which is like that everything was too much in the upper middle register, that like everything was very much consistent all the way through in terms of the placement of the registers of the instruments and their involvement and everything else, right? So we have a similar issue here where you're bringing in more and more brass, and then you're continuing on with this new idea, but it doesn't feel like a new idea because the agitato came in a bar early, and and you're continuing with the same instruments and the same registers, right? So could this be a place where let's say you just keep this, you don't add any winds, right? Could this be a place where instead of brass going forward, it would be winds going forward? And then you have the nimbleness of the xylophone, and you have the beautiful colors of the winds rather than the kind of the fatter texture of the brass. And even if you did end up doubling this section right in here, and maybe kept the melodic line a little bit more consistent in terms of the curve, like without dropping down an octave for the D's or jumping up. I would say keep the D's up, right? It's because like their sound is going to get absorbed by the massive brass below. So let's say that you did do this and you did have the winds doubling it and everything else, and you came to an end, which is another problem. There's no finishing note in the winds in the strings. But let's say that everybody came to an end here. Bum 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 bum. You have a little breath, and then it was the winds that accompanied the xylophone, and that would sound different enough, right? If you take the brass and the strings out, the winds are the most individual. They already have the most individual character of any section, which is one reason why it took me 3 courses to get through the wind section, with all of their different auxiliaries and so on. So. Yeah, I'm just afraid of it being much of a muchness, if you know what I mean, right? It's like both sections are beautifully scored for brass, but does the continuation feel like it's just continuing for too long in the same tonal color? And then from there on, I mean, I can see where you're holding off on the winds because you want this, at the poco più lento at E, you want that contrast right in there, right? So, I mean, I understand the reasoning. But I mean, there are other things you could have done, like staccato winds and pizzicato strings, perhaps. But the brass are just pretty relentless and consistent in their timbral quality, right? So they cannot change as much as strings can, and they cannot sound as uniquely individual as winds can. So, anyways, I mean, no disappointments or anything. I think it's all scored very, very cool. And it's interesting how you really sort of hold back a lot on your trumpets. You could have used them much more than you did, and you could have scored them higher than you did, but you really chose to keep them within a reasonable kind of an area. I would almost want to give this fairly low scoring to the third trumpet player right in here. But I mean, there's nothing that couldn't be played by a second trumpet player. It's just just the roll and the range and so on. Anyway, what a cool score! You really enjoyed this, and once again, we've got a bit of a history together, and these evaluations of you turning in these really unique scores and just really thought-provoking things that that ended up getting a lot of comments and saying, wow, so I think that this is the strongest one yet. And perhaps, the one that falls within the guidelines the most, right? So like the more orchestral concert approach, more than other entries that you've submitted. And so it's just great to see that. And with that, I think the only thing left to say is just thank you so much for being there throughout this whole journey with me. Of like with these, just sort of seeing the Orchestration Online community grow into what it is and being a part of it with, just great comments and feedback for other people who are, struggling with their orchestration too. And just being really kind of helpful and supportive of me. I mean, to the point where you're supporting on Patreon, which is really, really appreciated. And just, like that's you are a bright star in a galaxy of bright stars, right? Just like all the other people supporting on Patreon, who I appreciate so much. And whether somebody can support or not, just following the channel and liking, subscribing to the website or the channel, giving a comment where you feel it's appropriate, and so on. Especially the constructive feedback for our orchestrators. That's all so much appreciated, and everybody is doing their part to make this a really strong internet community. And I would never have suspected in my wildest imaginings how successful things would get with this, but I really owe it to you guys. You guys are what make it work. So thank you so much for that. And I will be uploading a couple of or releasing a couple of these evaluations a day, except for days where I release like the website evaluation. So I'm just going to keep it strong. We're going to keep it going throughout the month of October, and I will be seeing you with some more great entries to look at really, really soon.